Hello everyone and welcome back to the video. This week is going to be all about the Franks, and I've got a few videos lined up for you guys around this civilization and around some of the major topics around this civilization. And starting off the week, we're going to have a top 5 civilizations to counter the Franks in Age of Empires 2. Let's hop right into it. So the reason the Franks are such a popular topic, at least something I definitely want to tackle right now in the Age of Empires 2 community, is the fact that they're currently sitting at a 55% win rate average across all elos. So something that from beginner players to expert players, we can all say that from the stats, the civilization is incredibly strong. However, I do believe that the civilization has some weaknesses, and it's something that we can definitely exploit, and as a player base, play a little bit smarter against the civilization to be able to win more games against it and understand where its strengths lie and where its weaknesses lie and play accordingly. In my top 5 list, you're going to see a different method to counter the civilization or the Franks in general, and one method is to go with the more like camel approach, and the other approach is going to be a archer plus halberdier or a cav archer approach, which kind of delves into the big weaknesses that the Franks have going into the late game or going into the Imperial Age. And the 5 civilizations that I have on the list will just excel in those departments, and so it really gives you a few options to pick up based on the type of player you are. Let's hop right into it and take a look at number 5. So at number 5, I've got the Chinese. Not only are the Chinese a fantastic civilization overall in their own right, but I think they personally have all the tools to deal with the Franks and to nullify the Franks' advantages. So the Chinese might not be the most beginner-friendly civilization based on their start. However, once you get to the mid-game, you'll notice that you have a very smooth economy because you have those extra villages from the early game. You have really cheap upgrades, which helps you from Feudal Age onwards. And you also have great options in the Castle Age and Imperial Age because you have camels and heavy camels, you have halberdier with cheaper techs, and you have arbalest that you can easily get into as well. So you really have a couple options with going for arbalest plus halberdier, or if we're going for like the heavy camel plus skirmisher line, or even heavy camel plus Chukanu line as like a late game transition can be interesting. The one big thing that you miss with the Chinese is a way to deal with bombard cannons effectively, because you lack bombard cannons yourself and you don't really have the monks to convert the cannons or the strongest cavalry to just run in and snipe them. However, in my opinion, arbalest, light cav, and halberdier, a mix of those combination, should really not die to mass bombard cannons from the Franks. So in my opinion, you will be fine, but it's something to keep in mind. Jumping in at number 4, we're taking a look at the Britons. And one thing that I think about when countering the Franks is being able to match their early game. In my opinion, you're not really supposed to beat the Franks in the early game because they are crazy from the early game to the mid game. So all you're trying to do is nullify their advantage, just go even with them, and then look to beat them in the late game using some superior composition and starving them from gold. And I think the Britons are able to do that in a great fashion. You have a great early game because you have the sheep bonus that helps you out in Dark Age. You also have your faster working ranges, so you can match their early game production or their faster uptime with some of your own archers. And then once you get to Castle Age, you can play with extra range crossbowmen and some monks alongside cheaper town centers to help defend you against skirm knight aggression that the Franks might throw against you. And one of the biggest benefits of the Britons is that you simply just don't really die to siege pushes, because if you have mangonels at your doorstep with 7 range, you can just mass a ball of 30 expo with an extra range, and you can 2-shot that mangonel and it can't even hit you. So it's a really good anti-siege push option in the Castle Age. And then once late Castle Age rolls around and they're mixing in a ton of knights and maybe some skirmishers, you can easily mix in some knights of your own as the Britons, or some monks and pikemen to defend yourself against him just running in and swarming your archers. If you're scared of a forward castle, well, your boom should be pretty strong with the Britons and it should be quite even with the Franks. So all you have to do is simply get your own defensive castle and then go into a treb war where you have werewolf. If the guy goes bombard cannons, we've got the longer range arbalest. Britons simply don't die to bombard cannons in open maps. It's extremely hard to lose to them, and you're always going to be able to snipe them if your opponent is trying to go aggressive and make use of them. Alright, at number 3, we've got the Hindustani. Now, this is a bit of a newer civilization. However, old Indians kind of did the trick as well. These newer Indians, Hindustani, have some slight differences that might impact the matchup a little bit, but I think the new Hindustani is actually better versus Franks simply because our camels are actually just insane versus knights. So basically, the game plan with Hindustani is to neutralize the knight threat with our camel threat. And if at any point in the game the Frank player decides to go full YOLO and just go for a ton of knights, we can just match that with a ton of camels. Furthermore, our start is very fast paced because we're saving food on villagers starting from Dark Age, so we can match the Franks early game quite consistently with the Hindustani bonuses, and we can just pretty much go even every single time against them, which is a huge factor to having a counter civ to the Franks. Not only that, but going into late game, if we're relying on our camel, they can't really rely on their paladin, and if they find a answer to our camel, which in most cases is only going to be like halberdier, we can easily just go for hand cannons with extra range that the Franks have a ton of problems dealing with. If they go for some skirmishers, they're going to get outranged. They don't have a lot of armor, so we can easily mix in some skirmishers of our own, or even some hussar to break the lines of the skirmisher, or even just our imperial camel that will shred skirmisher as well. So as you can see, if we're able to secure a lot of gold with Hindustani, it's going to be a very easy time dealing with the Frank player. We also have other options like going for halberdier ourselves, as well as heavy cav archer, and even the Ghulam to shred them if they go for halberdier and skirm mix. So no matter what the Frank player goes for, Hindustani has an option, and we also have that early game to match them. We also do get bomber cannon, so that's not even a talking point with the civ matchup. At number 2, we've got the Gurjaras, another new civilization, and this one honestly could have been number 1. The only reason I didn't put it at number 1 is that I simply just don't have enough testing in the matchup, and I just haven't seen it enough to give you a concrete, yeah, this civilization destroys the Franks. But in theory, the Gurjaras are completely wiping out the Franks in most cases, and the main reason for that is simply the completely dominant Gurjara camels. I mean, if we're talking about a strong camel to counter knights, it's the Gurjara one. It's so strong, you deal a abundance of bonus damage, so the Frank player can never really go knights at any point in the game. Even in Imperial Age, it's hard to justify them going cavalier because we have extra armor heavy camel, which we're making for cheaper if we pick up the unique tech, and that's doing mass extra damage against cavalier or paladin. So there's really no situation where the Frank player can go for paladin if we can go for heavy camel as Gurjaras, and the same can be said as knight versus camel in Castle Age. Aside from that, Gurjaras also have a fantastic early game, which is a theme with all my civilizations here. We need to match that Frank early game, so we make sure we don't fall behind in the Dark Age and Feudal Age, and make sure we're leading into a safe mid-late game where Frank weaknesses start to show and we can take advantage. Gurjaras also have great options against infantry with the unique unit that we can go into, which is the Chakram Thrower. It's actually a really strong option against mass infantry, and it's going to be a great counter against throwing axemen and against halberdier alike. So just going for Chakram Thrower plus heavy camel as a main composition for Gurjaras is a great way to approach it. If you don't have the gold for Chakram Thrower, simply going for skirmishers that are fully upgraded with Gurjara is a great option and should be great in pairing with the camels. If the Frank player randomly decides not to make knights at all and they stick with their archer opening into some infantry, we can easily stay on Shiramsha riders in the mid game, and you should be more than fine because that unit is incredibly strong, and the Gurjara boom should just be able to neutralize the Frank boom and in some cases even pull ahead. Alright, now before I show you guys my number 1 pick, some of you guys might have already guessed it, but let's go ahead and take a look at some of the honorable mentions that I have lined up, which kind of do the same as the other 5 civs I have on the list, but in my opinion, they just don't do it as good or as fast, and the early game might be a little bit slower. So the first one is going to be Berbers. It's real simple. If you get the late game heavy camel archer or elite camel archer slash heavy camel, either or really, you're gonna have a really easy time in the matchup. The reason I don't have them in the list though, and they didn't make the top 5, is because you're missing halberdier and your early game isn't as solid as some of the other civilizations. So yes, you have great camels, yes, you have a great late game, but getting there can be a little bit awkward sometimes. Still a good pick if you like the Berbers, but not in my top 5. Next up, I've also got the Byzantine. Also real simple, guys. Cheap halberdier, cheap pikes, cheap camel, cheap heavy camel, and you also get arbalest with the potential to go for a fast Imperial Age because your Imperial Age is cheaper. Pretty much all the tools to counter the Franks going into mid and late game. However, once again, your early game is really slow and it kind of suffers. So in a lot of cases, the Franks will pull ahead and they're going to be able to set up their forward castles when you're just getting to the units you need to deal with them. So it's very tricky to kind of survive that early game with Byzantine. But in my opinion, if you find a way to survive it, you're going to be in a great position in that late castle early imp to just completely find the counter units and take the game over from there. And one more honorable mention, I've got the Mayans. Mayans are a tricky one. I initially had them at 5th place, but in my opinion, the lacking of the stable takes away a little bit of an option against the skirmishers and also against the knights. So if you go eagles, you usually just die to knights from the Frank player, and so you don't really have a great answer to skirmisher with this civilization. So you can run into a lot of problems dealing with knight skirm pushes. I do still believe that they have a stronger late game with the cheaper arbalest and halberdier, and also the threat of eagles in late game, which don't really die to cavalry. 3 because now we can mix in easily halberdier and eagles. So mines do have a ton of options against the Franks, and in my opinion are a great counter pick, but they could lose out in the early game and they can run into some problems in Castle Age against the Frank composition. You might say going pikeman and eagle in Castle Age is viable, but the truth of the matter is that the pikeman will just simply never catch up to the knights, and the knights can just run around your base. So unless you're like siege pushing, you're not going to be able to force your opponent to fight your pikes, and that's the big issue there with the mines. Alright guys, the moment we've all been waiting for, the number 1 spot on my top 5 civilizations list to counter the Franks. We've got the Mongols. I mean, I can't think of a better civilization and a more easy game plan than the Mongols to counter the Franks. Not only do you have a even faster paced early game than the Franks because of your faster hunting, you also get this extra scout line of sight on your scout, so that enables laming, that enables fast scouting. So you get up to feudal age earlier, you have amazing knowledge of the game and the map due to your scouting bonus, and then you can easily go for the same options that the Franks go for, which is like scouts or archers in the early game. And then going to the mid game, you have some camels if you need them as an option, and you also get the Mangudai, and the Mangudai dies to absolutely 0 units the Franks can make. It kills paladin, it kills halberdier, it kills siege, it kills literally every unit, and the only weakness when it comes to the Mongols is getting overrun before you get to Mangudai and before you're able to get to that critical mass. There's also one window in the Imperial Age where the Franks can get to paladin before you have that nice mass of Mangudai, and they might be able to run into your economy and completely kill you, but usually it's pretty easy to avoid that. And if you really need it, you can easily open heavy camel first, or even just mix in some pikemen as you're massing your Mangudai. And really, once their initial wave of paladin dies, they have no counter to the Mangudai whatsoever. And even once again in Castle Age, if they have mass knights and you go 10-12 Mangudai, you can hit and run forever and you'll never lose a single one if you do it properly. So in my opinion, Mongols is just the most consistent civilization to take care of the Franks, and something that just I love seeing my opponent going first pick Franks at a tournament and I get first pick Mongols, and I'm thinking I can't lose this matchup. There's no way to mess it up, and in most cases I don't mess it up, but sometimes it can happen. Alright guys, that's going to be it for my top 5 civilizations to counter the Franks. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. As always, leave a comment and a like if you did, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Take care, peace, stay safe, see ya.